repeat this at the end, but I also want to extend a sincere thanks to Vanita, Raluca, Charnay, Chuck, and the entire Protein Society Council for organizing this webinar. Thanks, everyone. We'll transition now over to the CV workshop. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. And before I get into the CV workshop, I also want to introduce Jim Kiefer, who is a senior director and senior principal scientist at Genentech. And just a little bit of a background of Jim and myself. We see lots and lots and lots of applications every year at Genentech. We also are very much in conversation with other hiring managers, human resources groups at other companies, and we're hearing pretty much a consistent feedback. So I want to say up front, as a disclaimer, that this workshop should be completely unnecessary. There shouldn't be a need for really anyone to be attending this, but that's not the case. Unfortunately, it isn't. And hiring managers would agree. What we are seeing are some very common and kind of surprising issues that are coming up that prompted having a CV workshop. So this is based on hundreds of applications that we see yearly, but again, as well as many conversations with colleagues across academia and industry. And so what are some of those issues that we're seeing? I think the most important thing is that too many qualified candidates are being rejected at the CV stage, and they shouldn't be. Some of the increasingly common mistakes that we're seeing, we've kind of put these into categories here. One of the most surprising is the hunt for the pubs CV, where the candidate will provide a list of publications as they should, but it's incomplete, or it's upon request, or it intentionally misrepresents their authorship. The other is the copy and paste CV, where the candidate has a well-organized CV and cover letter, but it matches some other job description. In many cases, it's not even close. Or they can't be bothered to write a cover letter at all, which should be a no-no. You should always have a cover letter, but we get a large number of applications that don't have this. Or we get the I don't really like research CV, where the candidate CV mostly focuses on what they do outside the lab. I would think that most of this should be surprising, but it's not. We see this these kinds of CVs a lot. Or they'll focus on what they or that they want to lead something. It's not just the CVs though. We're seeing quite a lot of odd interviews. We get surprisingly often the no questions interview, where the candidate will have 0 questions in their first interview of the day with the director of the department. I'm not kidding. This happens way too often. But they are really, somehow they're trying to convince us they're really excited to work for the company that they don't really care to know. No questions. Interview 1. Or the team player, or my team player interview. They know there's no I in team, but they also know there's an M and an E. And so they're looking forward to all the support that they will get for their research. And that, we appreciate that will differ between academia and industry, but first the candidate needs to establish what they bring to the position. Another surprisingly common interview is the Guess My Skills interview, where the candidate will give a fantastic talk. Like, it's very clear, concise, compelling. It's perhaps what you would expect of a PI. That could be telling you something. The presentation might actually be from their PI. And that offers unfortunately, only clues as to what skills they have or what they actually did, and completely ignores the hiring manager's guidance, which I'm very sure most managers are giving, to show the how. Tell us how you did the work. Or the I don't want to write grants interview as the primary reason why they want to go to industry. So that's their rationale. Or saying that they don't feel competitive with academic track postdocs, and so that's why they're applying for industry. I would think that most would see why that's probably not the best way that you sell yourself to the position, but we see this enough to want to raise this point. So that's kind of the motivation for a workshop on CVs. And the outline for today is that Jim's going to go over the math of the job market and what's involved and what you need to know when you're one of hundreds of CVs. The do's of drafting a research-focused CV, I'll go over a little bit of that. And then some all too common CV don'ts. This will be perhaps amusing to some, but they are very common, hence the need to go over this. And then we want to obviously end with, your CV is great, and you get that phone screen and an interview, what to expect, how do you prepare, and also that elevator speech of you. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Jim. You're muted, Jim.
Good morning, everyone. So just to put in context the importance of the CV and getting it right, I wanted to go through this section on what Chris and I were thinking of as the simple math of the application process. And this is mainly speaking about industry positions, but I'm sure there are parallels in academia. But certainly in industry, every single position receives hundreds of applications, usually in the first 2 to 3 weeks. And so that should tell you several things. The first thing it should tell you is if you're only seeing a job ad 2 months after it's been posted, likely even if you apply, you won't be seen. There are simply too many applications already in the hopper, and no one will ever look at your information. So you need to be looking for postings. If you're thinking about a job in the next few months, you need to be looking for postings all the time, at least on a weekly basis, and things like Indeed.com or Nature Jobs, Science Jobs. As soon as you see an application, a posting that might be relevant, you need to apply. And so that means you need to have your CV ready to go. You need to have something like a cover letter ready to go that you can edit and make specific for that particular position as opposed to generic. And then you need to make sure that your materials, not just for the prior job, but for each and every job that you apply to, have all the right information in them. And part of that information are the relevant keywords from the job posting, as well as any other keywords or information that will be important to accomplish that job or that role. And the reason why that's important is because since we receive hundreds of applicants, we have to somehow filter down to the ones we think should be relevant. And that is often, as shocking as it may sound, comes down to filters that we will apply, text search filters that we will apply to that large list of CVs. And so if the job posting is about protein purification and the phrase protein purification does not appear anywhere in your materials, you will likely never get seen. The other reality, and this is true absolutely both in industry and academia, is that the main driver, at least at the after you've completed your graduate work or your postdoc, the main driver for success in moving forward in the application process will be having high impact first author publications. And so those need to not only be present, you need to have had some, but you also need to make them easy to find. There are a number of times when people sort of feel like they've applied, but it's a black box. What happens next? If you happen to know the hiring manager, or certainly if you contact the HR department at that company, you will almost always receive a response that at least tells you where you are in the process. In addition, once you're through the first part, you've gotten your CV looked at, the next phase is generally that hiring managers will have phone screens, and they will typically take that list of hundreds of potential applicants in the beginning down to 10 to 15 that will have a phone screen. These are usually half an hour to an hour. They might be one-on-one with the hiring manager, or they might include several of the people from the hiring committee. But basically, The assumption is to get to this phase, you have to have had a great CV that seems like it's a solid fit to the position. And it's usually clear that we can whittle this 10 to 15 people down to just 2 or 3 or 4 to bring in for an interview on site, even after only spending a half an hour with them on the phone. And so that is sort of a teaser for later of what's important to accomplish in that phone screen, because your odds at this stage are so much better than they were in the beginning, you don't want to blow it. On site, we usually have 3 to 4 candidates for a position. If we don't like any of those 3 or 4, we'll bring in more for sure. But usually it's down to just a couple. And so again, you want to really nail that interview. And you have to communicate both that you have scientific expertise, an interest in the position, and that you have the relevant skills that will make you successful there. Next slide, thanks. So more about the math. So the good news about that hundreds of applicants applying in the first place is most of them are not qualified. And so you're not really competing against 200 or 500 other people, you're really competing against 20 or 30. However, you have to make it clear that you are one of those 20 or 30. You have to have a CV that we can readily determine is actually appropriate for this job. And so I mentioned about keywords and making sure you have those present, but also your CV and your cover letter need to be well formatted so that we can look at them in very little time, find the information we need to find, be impressed by it, and then put you in the good stack. If it takes us too long to find the information, then you go in the bad stack. And this is the piece that is really heartbreaking for applicants. You put a lot of energy into your CV, into your cover letter. You assume that someone's actually going to read every single word before they come to a decision on your candidacy. The reality is you generally get about 30 seconds to a minute. If in that 30 seconds to a minute, you have all the right information in places that are easy to find, then people will spend a lot more time with your CV. If instead they spend that 30 seconds to a minute trying to find publications and can't, then your application will be rejected immediately. So make it easy for people to find what they need to find, and then make it clear that you're a good fit for that particular job.
So that brings us to the do's of drafting a science-focused CV. And I'll first re-emphasize a point that Jim just made there. We're going to say this, you're going to hear this quite a few times if you haven't already. Match your CV to the job description. And this starts with understanding that your CV is one of the most important documents you will ever write. It's almost as important as our publication record. And there's something that we've noticed all the CVs of all outstanding candidates have in common. It's immediately clear, less than 30 seconds of taking a look at the CV, that they have documented evidence, so publications, of start to finish success on their independent research. And another key point here is that this shows up twice. They've been scientifically successful at least twice. Not necessarily in 2 different labs, but most often it would be in 2 different labs. Not all hiring managers would articulate it this way, but I think if you look at the applications that are successful, that is the case. That when you look back and you do an analysis back of who ends up getting hired, they've been successful at least twice. So there's a question in I'm going to read the question here. For folks working in roles where publications are not possible due to confidentiality or other considerations, could public speaking engagements at conferences or scientific meetings be a suitable substitute? Absolutely, absolutely. That's a really good point. That is absolutely a substitute. And it's also something you want to cover in your cover letter. If you know or can reasonably expect that you are going to be competing against candidates who might not be in the same boat and who are able to publish their work, that's something you want to cover in your cover letter. And at the point that you raise, Drew, with your question here, can you put it your speaking engagements? You could also put patents in there. Do point that out in your cover letter. If you do that, the problem is largely resolved. So given that there's this emphasis on being able to know immediately within 30 seconds that there's documented evidence of start to finish success on your independent research, and you got to find this twice, it should be easy to find your professional experience in education, all of your publications and your authorship. This must be clear. and why you are a strong fit for this position at this institution or department, not some other institution, this institution. And so there are different ways of formatting a CV. This is simply just a proposal, but it's a proposal based on that need that the information be able to be found quickly within 30 seconds. It's very helpful if you start your CV with a professional summary or a profile, whatever you want to call it. And this is just 2 to 3 sentences or bullets of who you are, the summary of what would be your elevator speech of who you are, your research experience that includes brief bulleted summaries for each stage of your experience. In here, you want to be putting some words that are in the job description if you have that experience. Education, skills and techniques. It's not always included a skills and techniques section, but I will say that it's very helpful when it is. That is an area that I know many other managers go to see, are they matched to the job description if you summarize your skills and techniques. Otherwise, the manager will have to figure that out. And that's not always good. Awards and honors, conference participation and organization. And then very important, the publications. List all publications with clear authorship, consistent formatting, which is frankly rare to see consistency in the formatting, and your name is easy to find. Bold your name so that it's easy to find. I also want to make a point here. It may be technically correct to put your name first if you're second, but you're an equal contribution author, so like a co-first author. It may be technically correct to put your name first, but I know that a lot, and I think Jim and many others would agree that a lot of hiring managers don't like that. And it's completely unnecessary. It really is. So the recommendation would be, as it's published, that's the order in which you put the publications.
Hey, Chris, we had a question in the chat box. Gaurav is asking, do patent applications not awarded mentioned in the CV also help our applications?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because that's documented evidence of scientific work. So absolutely. Yes, I would put that in, even if not awarded, just simply indicate that applied.
I think that a clarification I'd put on that one is that once an application has been published, and so it's publicly available, that's when I would include it in the list. Up until that point, and published doesn't mean awarded, it just means it's now publicly disclosed that there's an application. Up until that point, it's really proprietary information, even the title of that patent. And so I would, in that kind of a case, I would put a little flag in the patent section that says, 1, 2, 3 patent applications have been submitted, but not published yet. Just so you're not doing anything that your current employer would be upset about.
There's another question here. Should we distinguish review articles from research papers? Do you want to take that one, Jim?
I would just put them all in the publications section. Usually it's obvious if it's a review or otherwise, but I don't think there's any particular need to draw attention to something being a review or not.
Right. So this next point here is a follow-up to that previous slide. The organization that we propose as one possible organization for CVs, it's proposed to follow this rule that you want to organize your CV and cover letter with the most relevant and impactful information first. And just think about matching the ad. It's surprising how rare this is, that the CVs actually match the ad. But what isn't surprising is that the CVs that move and the candidates that move into the phone screen, they very nicely match the ad. Include all relevant and true keywords and techniques from the job ad, as well as what you feel is relevant to the position. It's not a resume, so don't worry about the length. It doesn't matter if this is 3, 4, 5, 6 pages, because a one-page CV is probably only going to help the hiring manager become uninterested more efficiently. Again, we can't emphasize this enough. Clarity and matching the ad are far more important than length. So don't interpret this 30-second rule as meaning you got to get to a shorter CV. That's not it at all. It's just make the most relevant and impactful information up front. Patrick Allen has a question. What is your opinion on the use of colored fonts to highlight different sections of your CV? I've heard conflicting information of black text only versus attracting attention to parts of the CV. I don't really have a preference here. I don't personally think it's necessary because I see a lot of excellent CVs, very well formatted, and they're not doing that because of fonts or changing the font color. If it's not too distracting, I think it's okay, but I'm not seeing it as essential. You want to add anything to that, Jim?
I think, as Chris has said, consistency in formatting is most important. And so if you think about almost like an outline, you need to have indenting, for different sections. If you're wanting to use bullets, use a consistent type of bullet. Have equivalent things bolded or in a different font size, for instance, but be consistent.
So another question here from Jimmy. What weight, if at all, do preprints have? They carry weight. Of course, they don't carry as much weight as accepted publications, but they carry weight. They carry, another comment I'll make on here is they carry weight, particularly if it's clear that you've just finished that work and you have submitted it, you've written it up, it carries weight. But if you put work that the hiring manager can very easily figure out is a publication in preparation from, and if you put this in as and indicate as preparation from work that you did 5 years ago, that doesn't look so good. It sends the signal that you're just very slow to write up your work. That might not be the case, but that is the message that's being sent.
So Chris has told you about things to do in your CV. Now I have several examples of things not to do. And the first one applies mostly to industry positions, but everything else really should be equally relevant to both industry and academia. Coming from academia, people often feel like, or maybe even told, that they're supposed to have certain buzzwords in their CV that will help them get the job. One of the most common phrases is being a team player. And another one is they wanted to help people. That's the jargon for trying to distinguish that you want to do translational research or work in a company, I guess, to some people. Those are basically garbage words. Don't put those in there, and instead put in something that actually conveys through your experience and how you work what you're interested in. And so if you have collaborated with lots of people, mention that you have had strong collaborations with Lab X or Person Y. That will actually demonstrate that you're a team player and can function in that kind of a setting. If your work actually is relevant to cancer, that already may demonstrate that you might have a translational interest, or you might have a pharmacological interest in the end. But don't waste time on silly buzzwords. In addition, you want to make sure that how you phrase things is meaningful and conveys the impact and the work that you've done. And so, for instance, don't say something generic and bland like, I worked on determining structures of DNA polymerases. That's bad for a number of reasons, one of which is it's not clear if you just worked on it and failed or if you actually got it done. And also maybe how many or which polymerases. And so, for instance, you could say, I successfully determined the structures of 4 DNA polymerases. That imparts a lot more information, and it's also a very positive feeling that the person reading it will get from that sentence. Instead of saying something short, again, trying maybe too hard perhaps to be brief rather than clear. If you say, I found out that the pathway is critical for ubiquitination of P53, that not only is using a little colloquial kind of jargon, but it's not providing much information. If you instead say something like, my protein labeling strategy enabled us to demonstrate that the pathway is required for ubiquitination of P53, causing its degradation and transforming the cell to a precancer phenotype, that gives a lot more context. You can almost think about it as like a mini abstract, where you've indicated what you've done. You've had a strategy that you used. It gave results of demonstrating that the pathway was key for P53 ubiquitination. And then it even gives the conclusion how it actually impacted the science and the work. A person reading that kind of a phrase will come away with a much more positive and clear vibe of what you've done than the first version. Now, there are also some other things to avoid. One of them is irrelevant information. So even though we said length is not a big deal, you want to make sure that you have the right information in your CV, and it needs to be relevant to the job at hand. If you won the 7th grade science fair, maybe you were an early bloomer in science, but it doesn't matter if if a PhD is required for the position. If you enjoy backpacking and skydiving, that's cool, except if we don't like your science, it doesn't matter. So leave those things out, and they're a distraction. In your cover letter, and again, you must have a cover letter. That is the piece where we can understand how you communicate, what your actual interest in this job is, how you see yourself. This is such an important piece of your application package. You've got to have one. But you need to make it clear in that cover letter what it is that you personally have done versus what it is that maybe you and your collaborators collectively have done. So that way the hiring manager has a clear idea of what you bring to the table and also how you fit into the bigger picture of the research that you were doing. The following slides will have a number of examples of actual things we have seen. We have anonymized them, both in terms of the person's name, and we have also anonymized the institutions from which they have come. Some of those institution names rhyme with actual institutions. There is no connection meant to be there. It was just easier for us to make up a fictitious name, thinking of things that actually exist. So don't try to read into identities here, but just recognize that these are actual examples of what we've seen. So this is an example initial page of a CV, the top part of the CV on the first page. And there are a number of things that are wrong with this one. And so the things that I would highlight are that the first line indicates that they're a crystallographer, which is hopefully the relevant skill for the position. However, that they're also a photographer. So that's information we don't need. Going down to that sort of one sentence summary that Chris was mentioning is often good to have. This one indicates that they're interested in both the scientific research position, but also the sales division. So if you're applying for a science position, you don't want to confuse the hiring manager into thinking that you're actually more interested in sales. That's going to get in your way. Some CVs will have something that they think is cute or gives them insight into the personality. They'll have a favorite quote, or they'll list a favorite novel or something like that. Don't do that. That's a waste of time and will just be a distraction, making people wonder what your priorities are. Over on the left-hand side, these are fairly common in European CVs, especially ones coming from France. I don't know why, but maybe that's the norm in those places. But there often will be a graphical element that will be sort of on the left-hand margin. These can be small and it sort of doesn't matter, or they can be enormous. We've actually had a couple CVs where they take up more than half of the width of the page. And so that leaves precious little information for the text that actually describes the applicant, all in favor of having some cute picture on the left. So avoid that unless where you're applying, that's actually the norm. And then again, back to information. If the position requires a PhD, it's certainly not necessary that you indicate that you graduated from high school. So, you know, your bachelor's degree is probably important. Where you got your PhD, definitely important. But we don't need to know where you went to middle school or high school or anything like that. So this is maybe a little bit deeper into there's something chiming. I have no idea what it is, but if you just ignore that, I guess. So this is a bit deeper into the CV where they've got a section on their research experience. Again, you can see on the left-hand side, there's more of these silly pictures that don't really add anything. But if you look at the section where they're describing their research, they're doing some things right. They've listed that they've held various positions at that particular company. Interestingly, though, they're in different roles. And so one of the things that's missing, if you could advance the thing, please, Chris.
Yep.
One of the things that's missing, in spite of all these different roles they've had at this particular company, is any description whatsoever about why those roles have been so different. Being a cancer biologist is not necessarily the same as being an inflammation biologist. Why the transition? Are they actually good and have depth of knowledge in both of those areas, or are they someone who can't commit? And so there needs to be some explanation here, both about what was accomplished, which is really key, but also maybe even a little bit of context of why the transition. And they only have a little bit of information. None of it is sufficient to really get a good feel of it. And then they also put in information that they were on the happy hour planning committee and the safety team, none of which are not necessarily helpful. And then finally, at the bottom, you see that there are a couple of things. One is that the formatting is crazy. And so back to that outline format concept, the indenting should be similar for similar types of information, both in the bottom section as well as above. That's not the case. And then finally, the last bullet indicates that they applied for 3 fellowships and 2 NSF grants. This gets back to a bit of the nuance that was being asked in the chat about whether submitted publications and things like that are equivalent or important to include. Submitted submitted publications, absolutely. Those eventually will come to a resolution of being accepted at a journal somewhere. However, in this particular case, just because you've applied for fellowships, the assumption is you didn't get them, and so that's actually a negative for you. So don't indicate that you applied for something you didn't get. And so this is just another example. This is very visually easy to interpret what's wrong here, but we literally have seen CVs like this, where there's a section that's just empty. Maybe they deleted it because they didn't want it for this particular position, but the bottom line is they couldn't be bothered to spend the time. Sorry, there's a huge truck. They couldn't be bothered to spend the time to actually clean up their CV. And so if you're the person reading this CV, trying to make a decision on the applicant, what you take away from this is they don't actually care. And if they don't even care about applying for the job, what kind of effort and interest are they going to put into doing the job? And so this is bad. And then now that we're in the publication section, there are a number of crazy things we've seen here. One of the things that Chris mentioned early on, but it's not actually on this slide, is there'll be a publication section, maybe 1 or 2 publications listed, and then a line that says additional publications available upon request. I'm sorry, unless you have 400 publications, list them all. What's missing is not going to be that impressive to go find it, make it easy to find. Sometimes people put a link to their name and initials for PubMed, assuming that we will click that link and we're perhaps reading this electronically. Maybe we printed it out and we're sitting on our couch reading it in the evening. And so having that little link is not going to be helpful. On top of that, unless it actually only gives your publications and not just everybody with your name and initials, we're not going to parse that. Why are we going to waste the time? Put your publications in there, make it clear. The other thing is here, these are all formatted differently. And so it's very difficult for someone who's reviewing this to figure out what's going on. At least all of them have the journals listed, but sometimes we'll have CVs that will just list the title of the paper. We won't know where the journal is. We can't go find that paper if we want to read it. The formatting is inconsistent also with respect to the person's name. It's bold in some places and not others. It should always be bold. Make it easy for us to find you in a big list if there's a big list. And then finally, the other authors aren't even mentioned. So we have no context whatsoever of where this particular author lands in the overall list, which can be important. So the publication section is critical. We should be able to find it really fast, and it should be laid out in a way we can interpret it, so that way we can make an informed decision about, do you have the right expertise? Have you actually been successful in those 2 cases in which Chris was flagging? And I guess the other thing you could maybe ask is why are you supposed to be successful twice? The rationale goes a little bit like this. The first time you're successful is likely in graduate school, but it was in a learning phase of your career. And so it's great that you were successful. It's great that you learned. Your postdoc, assuming the position requires one, is where presumably you're more on your own and independent. And so being successful there as an independent scientist is usually critical for being successful in your job and as a staff position in industry or faculty in academia. Chris, I see that there is a question in the chat or the Q&A, but I can't read it because it's off my screen.
I'll read it for you. So you have 3 questions now, Jen. The first one is, should LinkedIn, Google Scholar, ResearchGate, or other website links be mentioned in the CV? If so, where?
I think it's fine to have all of those things listed. Usually they are listed towards the top on the front page, almost where you would list things about your address or something like that. But I think anything you list, you need to be very careful that if someone wants to follow that link, they're going to like what they see there. If you use your LinkedIn page mainly to complain about politics or religion or something controversial and non-scientific, that's not going to be helpful. You want to, whatever you're showcasing or inviting someone to look at needs to be relevant and helpful to your application.
Another question, Jim. Can we write a short abstract of the publication?
You could, but I don't think it's necessary. I think that the important thing, at least for me, is to have the titles in there. And so that more than the journal name will give you a sense of what's that article about. Again, although we've been emphasizing you get 30 seconds to be impressive, if you succeed, you get more than that. And so I think that's where, as long as your publications sound interesting, that's where the hiring manager will then go and get that publication and read the whole thing if they're interested. So it's about making sure everything is easy to find and relevant, but you don't have to load it up with more and more information.
Next question, Jim. Do we have to list all co-authors in publications if the list has more than 10 names?
I don't think there's any magical cutoff. Certainly if you're on one of those publications where there are 100 names, I would not do that. But I think you want to be pretty fair and objective about how you would truncate the list. And so if you're listing up to 10, be consistent. And then have ... and certainly include all of the corresponding authors that are all listed as corresponding. That might just be one last author, but if there were 3 co-corresponding, then I would list all 3. And certainly don't, if you're 50th in the list, then you may need to flag that with a bullet or some kind of a notation to indicate I was author number 50.
Another question from Teresa. Is it appropriate to have the hyperlinks to the papers embedded into the list of publications?
I think it's fine, but don't use that as a surrogate for actually putting in all the necessary citation information. You need to have all of those things. And then if you also want to include the hyperlink, great, because if it's a PDF and you click it, then you're already at the paper. But don't do that instead of putting in the title and the journal and all that other good stuff. Okay, I think there's maybe one more slide on things not to do. And this is an example. This is a real example from a cover letter of something not to do. I cannot emphasize enough not to submit Word documents, submit PDFs. And for that matter, open the PDF after you save it and make sure it looks right. We literally had an applicant who had submitted a Word document that also had track changes on, and they had left the track changes in there. They made a claim that they had done something, and then there was a comment in the track changes from their advisor that said that you did not actually do this. Someone else in your lab did this, and you're claiming credit and should not, and you need to remove this from your cover letter. So the scary thing is they left it in the cover letter. And so that told us a number of things about this applicant. One huge one being that they are intellectually dishonest. And so not only did we not pursue this applicant, we also put them on a list of never to look at their application in the future. So certainly don't submit Word documents, but also be ethical. And then the other thing is, and this is really something unfortunate, so the cover letters are supposed to be a way for us to understand who you are and how you communicate. If you can't be bothered to spell check your cover letter, or you can't be bothered to spend 20 seconds making sure that the company you're applying to or the institution you're applying to is correct, then how much attention are you going to pay to your actual job if you get it? And so be very careful when you're submitting a cover letter that you actually edit it and you make it specific to the job you're applying to. Also, think about putting yourself forward in a positive light. The reason why you're applying to any job should always be because that job and that company or that academic institution are interesting and awesome. If you instead lead off with, I'm applying for a job because I just got laid off, or I'm applying for the job because my boss just lost their grant, that's not endearing us to you. You need to convince us that you want this job and that there's some reason behind it other than bad ones. They need to be positive, forward-looking reasons.
So, yep. There's another question.
There was a question related to the, there's a lot of questions on publications in your CV. So Gaurav is asking, how do you define high impact papers? Is it based on impact factor of the journal or citations to the individual papers?
Go for it, Chris.
Okay, high impact papers. We're not talking about, like, of course, Cell Science and Nature are high impact. We're talking about what is relevant for your particular field. That is documented evidence that you have done impactful work. So when we say high impact, it's actually not so much saying that it's how the world ranks or the scientific community ranks journals as high impact. It's impactful for your field as is relevant to the position. So to answer your question, it's less has less to do with the impact factor of the journal or citations to the individual papers. I do see that some applicants are putting in information like the number of citations to their papers. I really don't think that's necessary, especially if your publications are a match to the job description and they clearly convey that you have the relevant expertise. Of course, what I've just said is it's also the case that high impact, according to number of citations and journal impact factor, probably do track very well with your expertise, but that's not exactly what we're looking for. The more important thing is that impactful work that's relevant to the position.
So there's a great question that came through the chat about how to address time off from research. And it could be something like taking time off and raising a family or something like that. I think that's a fantastic question. It's one that is always tricky to navigate and wonder how to handle. I think any time off or any, call it diversion from what the most efficient path could have been, should be addressed in the cover letter for sure. That should not be your first paragraph, because your first paragraph should be, trumpets blaring about why you're an awesome fit for the position. But somewhere in there, maybe paragraph 3, you want to address why it is that you're applying for this particular job now. I mean, for instance, if this is your first job after having a child and maybe you've been out of the workforce for a year or two, why was there a gap? Don't be apologetic, frankly, be proud. But also be clear about why it is that it's appropriate for you to return for work now. If you are having to care for, someone, or you raising a family, or you decided you wanted to try out being an investment banker, whatever happens to be, just be clear and honest about that. But then also be very clear about why it is that you're ready for the job you're applying for now.
I completely agree. I've seen cover letters where that is laid out, why there's a gap. And I can recall one in particular where it really spoke to that person's character. It was a very good reason, really spoke to their character. And that just put their application at the top of the pile. So in some cases, especially if you provide a good explanation for that, it helps. It definitely helps. I wouldn't worry about that, especially if you explain it. Okay. We're past time, but we're going to stay on. So I just want to let everyone know it's 12:30, but we're going to stay on because a lot of great questions. So there was a question here, which we're getting to right now, from Simon. Could you comment on typical questions and topics at the phone screen stage in the interview process? That's what we're getting into now. So when you get to phone screens, there are 4 key things that the hiring manager and interviewers want to know. There are sure other things, but these are 4 key things. They want to know you can communicate, because the science is close enough matched to the needs that you've made it to this phone interview stage. So they want to know you can communicate, want to know you can collaborate, want to know that you're qualified and they want to know you're interested. And that gets to why we said earlier that it becomes very obvious at this stage who to bring in for a formal interview. I'd say that that point on you're interested is for me a primary reason why candidates fall out at the phone screen stage, because I can't tell if they're actually interested in this position or this is one of 100 companies that they've applied to. And what's a great way to show that you're interested? Immediately after your phone screen, you email that hiring manager and you let them know that you appreciate their time and answering their questions, the time that they've taken. I don't know why this isn't obvious to everyone, but it is not obvious to everyone that you should be doing this, because more than half of candidates never do this, never bother to email, reach back out to the hiring manager. I don't know why. That should be automatic. Don't even think about it, just do it. Reach out to the hiring manager immediately after the phone interview. And now, how do you succeed on phone interviews then? So that's what they're looking for. How do you succeed on it? Prepare and ask questions, please. Ahead of time, prepare and ask questions. And if you make it to the interview stage, if you're asking everyone in your interview panel the exact same question, that's okay. What you don't want to say is when the hiring manager or your interviewers will say, do you have any questions for me? I want to give you an opportunity to ask questions. Don't say that, no, all of my questions have been answered. I mean, that's true, but that's going to make for a hard conversation then. It's going to look like you're not really interested in the position. It might be that that person is at the very end of your interview schedule, but it's okay to ask them the same question again. Polish your elevator pitch. A way to be thinking about what your elevator pitch is, who you are. That's what we mean here is ask yourself, what scientific accomplishments am I most proud of? And ground that for your elevator pitch. Again, we cannot emphasize enough that everything in your CV, your interview, and your seminar should be matching the ad. Ground yourself in that. You also want to highlight your skills and follow the hiring manager's advice. Whatever advice they give you about their talk, they'll give you something. They'll tell you something. It'd be very rare that they say, no, I'm not going to give you any advice. Just give whatever talk you want. That's not going to happen. And a trick to giving a great seminar, I get this question a lot, or get asked to give some guidance on seminars. So one trick that has proven again and again and again to be really successful for postdocs at Genentech, graduate students, is to practice and polish your talk until you can give it without a pointer and without looking at your slides. It's actually really tough to do. You might be able to give your talk without looking at your slides, but it's really tough to give a talk without using a pointer. And that actually forces you to make a lot of changes to your slides. It forces you to really polish your slides so that you don't need to use a pointer. What usually happens when people do this and follow this trick is they're taking stuff out. They're removing information that they don't need to have in their slides, and they're simplifying things to be able to tell a clear scientific story. So if you are looking for a trick, this one works all the time. Learn to give a talk without your pointer and without looking at your slides. Be prepared to discuss why you did what you did, your strategy, problem solving. And as Jim has emphasized a number of times here, have a positive answer for why you are applying for this position. This is something that will come out in interviews. So with that, we'll take more questions. We've got a question here. How about mentioning failures in professional life? I founded a startup post-PhD which failed to take off. How should I address it in the cover or in the CV or cover letter? State what I learned from the failure. Yeah, you're bang on. Yes, what you learned, what you gained. Start from a positive perspective. What you gained from that experience. This is very common. Most startups do fail in this particular example. So cover, yeah, the way that you've proposed here, I think that's an excellent way. State what you learned from that failure. That's not something you should keep out. You should definitely put that in.
And I would add to that you want to try, while being honest, but you want to try to present the positives in all of these things. And so maybe the startup failed, but what had it accomplished? Had it accomplished absolutely nothing? Okay, that's tricky. But had it accomplished some of the things it set out to do? Yes. Are you proud of that? I hope so. Include that as the first part. I founded this startup. We accomplished the following things. In the end, we didn't get our funding. And so then I moved on to position B. From that experience, I really learned the value of X, Y, Z. That's actually a very positive way to spin that story.
I don't see any other questions. I think we've answered everyone. Oh, here's another one. Abby is asking, I'm defending my thesis in October. When should I start applying for jobs in industry? Is there a too early to apply? I don't believe it's too early, especially if you now know that you've got a date when you are very likely to be done. And so I think it's fine to start applying now. If you didn't know when you were going to be done, that might be a situation where it's a little bit premature, because the question will come up. But if you're going to be defending in October, absolutely, this is the right time to be looking. Abby, no hiring manager is going to have an issue with that, especially if you point that out.
In fact, most industry positions come available in the first half of the year, mainly because everybody gets their budget for the year in January. And so your odds of finding a position are much higher if you're looking in the first half of the year, because there hopefully will be more opportunities posted.
We have a question here. I'll read this out and you can take a stab at this one if you don't mind, Jim. What if you haven't published any articles from and you are looking for other opportunities?
That's a tricky one. It is life. And so I think that's where the cover letter becomes really important. So the first step is you need to minimally meet the qualifications for the job you're applying for. If you don't have sufficient experience, then that's going to be a problem for you already. But as long as you would meet the minimum criteria, even if you haven't gotten publications from your current one and you want to do something else, just say that in your cover letter. I've worked for 1.5 years in lab X. I have decided in the course of that time that I am really more interested in doing, and then hopefully the next 5 or 6 words are the type of research that apply to this new position. But you do need to be concerned that you are communicating that you are successful, you're not a problem child, you're not having some massive issue because you have a personality quirk, you're just looking for a new opportunity.
I would also add that if you're in that situation, you may need to also do more. Like Jim points out, put that in your cover letter, but you may need to do more. You might need to be looking on LinkedIn to find people who are doing work that you think you're interested in and reach out to them. You can send them a message on LinkedIn. They might get a lot of that. So, you might need to bug a bit in order to get a response, but that works wonders. You can start engaging them, halfway through your graduate studies and say, hey, I looked at your work. I'd love to know more about it. Can you spare 15 minutes of your time to just chat and tell me about what you do? Hiring managers and scientists across research and academia love to do things like that. That is a primary responsibility to provide that kind of guidance. You might need to do things like that. And that gets foots in the door. That's, nepotism works. That helps there. Let's see, we've got, do we need to add research interests in my CV, specifically if I'm applying for a postdoc? Yeah, yes, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You need to let them know what you're interested in doing and why. You wouldn't be able to necessarily cover the why in your CV, but in your cover letter, you definitely should. They want to know that. Why are you interested in this position? We have another question. What is the view on pursuing an industry postdoc versus an academic postdoc when applying for an industry position? Well, say that if you are applying for, if you do an industry postdoc, there's nothing, there shouldn't be anything that is preventing you from then applying to an academic position. However, if you do an industry postdoc, most will, industries to which you apply after that will view that as at least some industry experience. And of course, because you've been working in an industry then for 3 to 4 years. If you are doing an industry postdoc and then want to apply for an academic position, the same rule applies. So keep that in mind. It's not preventing you from getting an academic position, but there will be a reasonable expectation that during your last 3 to 4 years, you've been not working under the confines of a budget, for example, and they may take that into consideration. So I can't think of any reason why doing an academic versus an industry postdoc is going to affect your chances of getting an industry job later on. We are regularly hiring from academia, so I wouldn't really factor that in terms of deciding where you want to do a postdoc.
I think the main thing, just to echo what Chris was saying, is you need to be successful, whichever choice you made for where you do your postdoc. However, if you do an industry postdoc, but you want to go back to academia, I think that can be tough for a couple of reasons. One of which is most of the professors who are getting faculty positions have a funding history, and you will not be able to establish a funding history of getting either a fancy fellowship or a bridge grant or anything like that if you go to industry for your postdoc. And so that's an important consideration if you think you might go back to academia.
I think Chris and
we'll wrap it up here.
Yeah, we should. There's maybe one last question from Amani that can probably be answered pretty quickly. If I have expertise in some, not all of the skills required in the job post, but I'm really interested in gaining that experience, should I still apply?
Take that, Jim.
Yes, but just make it clear.
Follow all the tips that Jim and Chris have given you today and apply for that job. All right, thank you so much, Jim and Chris, for organizing that CV workshop. I think that got as many questions, if not more, as the 3 science talks. Our 3 speakers had to leave already, but I want to thank them again for the 3 great talks, and to all the attendees who joined the science talks and the CV workshops. And for any aspiring drug hunters out there, definitely take what you learned in the CV workshop, but also join the Protein Society if you're not a member already. Chris, any parting word from you?
No, you've covered it all, Vinita. I just want to again thank everyone for their time, including the speakers, the attendees, and the organizers. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon wherever you are, or evening. Bye.